There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Shoff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I am your host, Richard Shoff. We're sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes of Kannapolis, North Carolina, and we are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second American, and pro-Second Amendment. We're here by the grace of God. If you want a good buy on a log home, give me a call, 800-848-3310. I'll work with you personally. Folks, I want to talk about the spread of Islam. The spread through not only Europe, but also in the United States. It's a real bad problem. We need to look at it. World War II became inevitable because of denial by the Brits, the French, and the Americans that Hitler meant what he said in Mein Kampf and was rearming to carry it out. Subsequent denial in the form of appeasement policies enabled Hitler's early swift success in conquering and subjugating almost all of continental Europe until Churchill rallied the British people with his famous declaration that, quote, "We shall never surrender." I want you to listen to me carefully today. I'm going to try to explain it so it's not too confusing. But bottom line, we need to be warned. An Islamified Western Europe is arguably one of the biggest stories of our time. Yet elites on both sides of the Atlantic are in denial about the coming Islamic takeover of much of Europe. There are already large Muslim minorities throughout many European countries, and waves of Muslim refugees have joined in the last 5 years. Given Muslims' average birth rate of 3.5 children per couple, compared to post-Christian European birth rates of only 1.35 per couple, the demographic die is cast from minarets and Sharia law to supplement church bell towers and constitutional democracy all across Europe. This all within 2 or 3 generations, folks. Our president, Donald Trump, has no illusions about the challenges the West faces. His first action after inauguration of 2017 was his executive order banning travel to the U.S. by people from countries well known for harboring Islamist terrorists. He did so on the basis of zero tolerance for terrorist entry to the United States and the fact that the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement could not vet people adequately due to gaps and irregularities in birth and identification records characteristic of these designatedly high, unstable countries. Despite the disrespect shown President Trump from many of the elites in the United States, he's commanded surprising respect overseas from friends and enemies alike. In his July 6, 2017 speech in Warsaw, Poland, Trump was welcomed as hero after he proclaimed the need to defend Christianity and Western civilization with all of its culture and traditions. He boldly stated the need to put faith and family, not government and bureaucracy, at the center of our lives. No other U.S. president has ever made such unapologetic and direct statements that challenge the status of postmodern decline in Europe. 5 months after taking office, President Trump removed the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord, and he's continued to remove restrictions on coal mining and to open up more sea and land acreage for petroleum exploration and drilling. What's the result? You're seeing it. The U.S. is exporting natural gas, and oil production is up, setting new records now exceeding 10 billion barrels a day. This while all oil imports are down. The U.S. is just now on the cusp of achieving the long-sought goal of becoming energy and OPEC independent. Twice since becoming president, Trump swiftly ordered military strikes in Syria after President Assad used chemical weapons against people in Syria. On the Korea Peninsula, in response to Kim Jong-un's oncoming ICBM missile testing and nuclear saber rattling, President Trump shunned avoidance and denial, taking an entirely different approach then from the preceding 4 presidents over 28 years. And despite condemnation by the foreign policy establishment that his direct policy would lead to confrontation and war, Trump never wavered in imposing harsh sanctions, repeatedly overflying B-1 bombers near the DMZ, and making forceful statements warning Rocket Man about U.S. military capability to destroy the North Korean regime and its nuclear capability. The result? You're seeing it, folks. Kim Jong-un agreed to the U.S. demand that they cease missile and nuclear testing. Then he responded to overtures from South Korea, becoming the first North Korean leader to ever cross the DMZ, that to discuss peace terms, first since the Korean War armistice in '53. Then the North Korea regime released 3 Americans in prison and held hostage. We didn't give them any money either. We didn't give them any of our deserters either. Now, folks, we've got that historic meeting coming up, the one in Singapore. In the Middle East, President Trump initiated 2 major actions that were opposed by much of a foreign policy establishment, preoccupied more than appeasing Sunni and Shia extremist rules in Palestine and Iran than in helping our one key democratic ally, Israel. On December 6, 2017, Trump reversed nearly 70 years of American foreign policy, announcing that the U.S. would recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. On June 8th of this year, only weeks before opening that new Jerusalem embassy, and against the stated wishes of our NATO allies, Trump pulled the U.S. out of the nuclear accord deal with Iran, stating that, quote, the Iran deal was horrible, one-sided, disastrous, and defective at its core. For Trump, it's not just about preoccupation with substance over appearance. Avoidance, denial, and pretense supply have no place in the calculus of a commander-in-chief sworn to protect our country and its allies in the age of terrorism and nuclear missiles. Leadership requires getting out of denial and making tough decisions. It also requires delivering results and substance over form and appearance. People may disagree with President Trump's persona and his manner of communicating, but he's had one of the most successful starts of any new president in history. All the more remarkable, given the nonstop assaults against him from day one by the media, Hollywood, and the political elite. We are seeing it every day. But folks, the spread of Islam in Europe is real significance, because many times what first takes place in Europe later comes to the United States. But in this case, what's spreading in Europe is already taking place in the United States. Well, that because of our former president, who incidentally, if not a Muslim in religious practice, he was certainly one in his heart. And he still has forces and people trying to undercut our president in America today. Islam in the U.S. today, 2018, right here. A U.S. Muslim preacher says, quote, soon America will be ours. In a few centuries in Syria, where more than 90% of the population were Christians at one time, and in Iran, where an overwhelming majority of citizens were Zoroastrians, the demographic drastically shifted to majority Muslim. Neither nation could have anticipated such a change. And here in the United States, the number of Muslims in the United States has increased by 40% in just 5 years, that between 2010 and 15. While in the same period, the non-Muslim population in the U.S. has grown by only 5%. You know who's responsible for this? The man who was president of the United States during those years. He's the one who pursued reckless immigration policies that have placed the U.S. in this position. He's the one who remains responsible for the great strife and violence that his actions will be bringing to America for generations to come. Radicalism. The real shock was the inaction of the Americans. That written by Majad Refzida, appearing in Great Stone Institute, May 12th of this year. Soon, said his writing, quote, America will be ours. Ours? Who's the ours he's talking about? The writer, it became clear, was an extremist Muslim in the U.S. who claimed to be a reputable religious preacher. With each new word, concern grew. He pointed out throughout his letter the, quote, sinful ways of the West, dancing, drinking, and dating. He expressed disgust that most women did not wear the Islam veil or participate in prayer 5 times a day. Then he got straight to the point. Ours, he explained, represented Muslims like him. That is what's going on in America today. The sentiment is hardly a new one. The person hears similar proclamations from many Muslim extremists throughout the years. The real shock was not the letter, but the reaction of many Americans after seeing it. Such a thing, they said, would never happen. Well, the writer's words were just bluster, nothing to be taken seriously. Most surprisingly, they stated honestly that Muslims who speak of such intentions do not really mean that they say what they say, so these threats should not be of any concern. The history of the 2 nations where I grew up, says our writer, were Iran and Syria. They taught us all that there was a big lesson about living in this kind of ignorance, the reality of how quickly a nation can be consumed by the philosophies of a religious state. An authoritarian and malicious regime as now exists in Iran, the world's leading sponsor of terrorism and brutality even of its own people, something we can't forget very soon. In a few centuries, in Syria, where more than 90% of the population were one-time Christian, and in Iran, where an overwhelming majority of citizens were Zoroastrians, the demographically drastically shifted to majority Muslim. Neither nation could have anticipated such a change. While many may underestimate the radical preacher claims that soon America will be ours, for extremist Muslims, these beliefs are strongly and deeply rooted. The number of Muslims in the U.S. has increased by 40% in just 5 years, as I said, between 2010 and 15, while in the same period, the non-Muslim population in the U.S. has grown by only 5%. That means that the Muslim population is growing almost 8 times faster than the non-Muslim population in the United States. And folks, we've got examples of that. You can see it up around Minneapolis. You can see it in parts of Michigan, even down in Trey County, part of South Carolina. That's where Obama sent in the Somalians and other Muslims. What are they doing? They're out producing. They're out having babies. They're not assimilating. They're growing faster than the rest of us, and they'll soon be a force to reckon with in those local areas. Let's look at Islam now in Europe. And again, folks, I want to explain the importance of this, because so often what happens in Europe spreads rapidly to the United States. In Germany, the mass migration of Muslim invaders posing as asylum seekers has caused crime rates to soar by 92%. Going to give you a few headlines, folks, from May 24th of this year. Angela Merkel, under more pressure over refugee policy, as it's revealed migrants committed over 142,000 crimes in Germany during the first 6 months of 2016. Another one, Merkel blow. German police blame crime increase on Chancellor's migrant policy. A massive 92% increase in crime, especially violent crimes and sexual assaults in Germany. It's all a direct result of Chancellor Merkel's decision to open the borders in 2015 to more than 1 million predominantly Muslim invaders pretending to be refugees and asylum seekers, with at least 200,000 more expected to arrive in Germany each year going forward. Do you see how the same thing was set up under Obama and we're fighting right now in the United States? Do you see what's happening, folks? According to a study funded by the government in Germany and carried out by criminologist Christian Pfeiffer, the massive invasion of mostly young Muslim males has, quote, fueled a rise in violent crime throughout Germany. Noted from the New Observer Online, those from North Africa were the most likely to commit offenses, followed by Syrians, Afghans, and Iraqis. Making this point using robbery statistics, Pfeiffer reported that in Lower Saxony, that's in England, folks, North Africans made up 31% of all refugees arrested for that crime, robbery, even though they made up just 0.9% of the total number of invaders claiming to be refugees. He went on to point out that the extent of the problem created by the mass Third World invasion. But now we've got a real problem. Last year, there were 327,000 people whose asylum applications were rejected. Pfeiffer said that the government now had no choice but to start repatriation program, which he estimated would cost over 1 billion euros. Things have gotten so bad in Germany now that 458 so-called refugees are being arrested every day for serious crimes, including 267 murders a day. According to the latest criminologist report, 2017, issued by the Federal Criminal Police Office, 167,268 non-Germans and immigrants, these are asylum seekers, were arrested that year for serious crimes. This works out to 457 arrests per day, every day, 365 days in the year. New Observer Online, about 40% of the arrested fake refugees came from the main countries of origin, the asylum seekers, namely Syria 20%, Afghanistan 11%, and Iraq 8%. These three groups together make up 61% of all asylum seekers in Germany in 2017. The overwhelming majority, 87%, of the arrested invaders were male. 66% were younger than 30 years. That means that 13% of all the fake refugees arrested in 2017 were female, while they made up 34% of the asylum seekers that year. There were over 5,200 recorded sex offenses committed by the fake refugees in 2017 in Germany, a marked increase compared to 2016, where there were only 3,600 such attacks. The breakdown of victims revealed that the vast majority were Germans. Over 46,000 non-white invaders pretending to be refugees who were victims of a crime committed by their fellow fakers, while 95,000 Germans were victims of crime involving at least one immigrant. Furthermore, out of 600,000 asylum decisions made in 2017, some 230 applications were denied, but only 24,000 were deported. Do you see the similar problem that we're having here in America? They got more than one problem in Germany. A quote, "We are coming and we'll take your country." A quote from Muslim biker gangs and boxing clubs training to take over Germany. A report came in on May 22nd of this year. Right now, folks, German Muslims have established a self-styled biker gang. German Muslims, which is said to be modeled after Hell's Angels and aimed at protecting fellow Muslims from ever-growing hatred of Islam. The emergence of the group, which aspires to open chapters in cities and towns across Germany, has alarmed German authorities, who have warned against the growing threat of vigilantism in the country. Muslim vigilante enforcement, Islamic justice have become increasingly common in Germany. The government's inability or unwillingness to stop them has led to the rise of anti-Muslim counter-vigilantes. German BFV intelligence agency, in its latest annual report, warned that an escalating action-reaction cycle could result in open warfare on German streets. The gang, which calls itself, quote, Germany's Muslims, now has offshoots in many areas throughout Germany. It was founded by a Marcel Kunst, a German convert to Islam, who also uses the name Mahmoud Salam. The gang's uniform consists of a black leather jacket with a logo depicting a one-fingered salute of the, quote, finger of Tawhid, which represents belief in the oneness of Allah. The logo also includes the number 1438, which represents the current year in the Muslim year, as well as the number 713, which stands for GM. That's Germany's Muslims, the 7th and 13th letters of the alphabet. Police say they do not know how many people belong to the gang. It was established in May a year ago. The group's Facebook page, which has more than 1,000 followers, describes itself as a citizens' initiative which advocates for the peaceful coexistence between Muslims and non-Muslims in Germany. Our organization has been founded for only one purpose, they say, to protect and support our brothers and sisters from the ever-growing hatred of Islam. Although Germany's Muslims claim to disavow violence, police say that several of its senior members are known to be Salafists, whose aim is to replace liberal democracy in Germany with Sharia law. Folks, this is happening in other countries. It's all in Western Europe. In Sweden, they have so many problems with inbreeding and the reproduction of the Muslims over the non-Muslims. 8 times as many babies are being hatched from the Muslims as the non-Muslims. Rapes in Sweden and France are where you can't reveal who the rapist was, what country they came from, that they were refugees or illegals. In France, the police can't go in to no-go areas. The problem is similar in the Netherlands. This is going on in Europe today, folks. It's also going on in America. Islam, so serious. So serious in Europe that people are fleeing Western Europe because of Muslim migration. Listen to me. We're going to talk about different individuals. One Christian migrant who returned to Syria because he found Austria more dangerous. Another is a Croatian man who grew up in Sweden but recently moved to Poland with his wife and kids, saying he doesn't recognize the country he grew up in. Yet another, also a part of what has been called a Swedish diaspora, is a woman who moved to Hungary because she said, quote, "There is no safety at all in Sweden." They're all part of the secondary migration. And why? It's all caused by Muslim migration. Many would find it shocking that people would leave the rich West for relatively poor Eastern Europe and even war-torn Syria. But it underlines a reality denied and covered up by Western governments and media. The large influx of Muslim migrants into Europe in recent years has caused expanded crime and growth of the no-go zone phenomenon. More scandalous still, the cover-up is so intense that it has led to police ignoring female rape victims, telling others not to mention the ethnicity of their attackers, and to a leftist Dutch mayor's attempt to keep her own mugging in a migrant area out of the media. In other words, the gals that get raped can't even tell the police or the media. The media won't announce where these rapists come from the refugee community, from the Muslim community. Christian Syrian Sphero Haddock wanted to come to Europe so badly that he spent £3,000 on smugglers to reach Austria. He left his native country because, as he put it in an interview with a German TV broadcaster in Syria, quote, "We are Christians and lost everything in the war." Initially optimistic, his hopes were quickly dashed, however. "I was so scared when I saw so many refugees openly pledged to ISIS," he said. Note that this accords with the report of practicing Muslim and fellow refugee Dr. Mudar Zaran, who said in 2015 that he had pictures and names of terrorists who actually are already in Europe. Haddad said that he had to keep his Christian faith secret in Austria to survive, and that he had to echo the jihadist types who wanted to change churches into mosques. This, according to Voice of Europe. Note, reported in 2012, this is already happening. As he put it, the people I had once fled were now making the decisions. Moreover, in what now has become a common practice, he said, that he contacted Austrian authorities, but they didn't take him seriously. They wouldn't listen. So, 3,000 pounds sadder and wiser, he returned to Syria. Amazingly, he actually feels safer in Damascus than in Europe, a continent from which he has a warning. It's not good that Europe is open to all, he said. ISIS and al-Nusra want to destroy everything, even you. If you don't understand that, I'm pessimistic for the future of Europe, he said. No one has to tell this woman, interviewed recently by Hungarian news channel M1 and identified only as a member of the Swedish diaspora. Born in Sweden to a Hungarian mother, she explained that she left because there is no safety at all with those immigrants they let into our country. Similarly, the situation is only getting worse, the woman states. It's so bad now you can't travel during the daytime even on the trains in Stockholm. That was where I lived, because the migrants sexually molest the women. MSD said no one helps, not even the police. As for MSD, she states that migrants get jobs before native Swedes do. In fact, she claims that even Swedish doctors have trouble finding positions, saying that while she was lucky enough to land an internship at a hospital, Approximately 80% of her colleagues were migrants, Muslims, that included doctors and nurses, everyone. MSD says that many Swedish nurses leave their jobs because they get sexually molested in the workplace. In contrast, a native Swedish man can get in trouble if he even looks at a woman cross-eyed. Yet she says that these facts are not allowed to come out. The press keeps it quiet. There's no one getting the news out. This, too, is an old story. Just consider the ordeal of Emma, a Brit who was raped by multiple Muslim men when she was 13, only to be told repeatedly by the police not to mention who the attackers were. That was reported in Breitbart last year. Why do we leave? Sweden has been in decay for quite some time now. The schools are terrible. Simple medical help takes a long time. The violence is increasing on every level, and I simply don't recognize the country I grew up in anymore. He now finds Poland vastly preferable and lives there with his wife, children, and parents, and will be joined by his wife's parents in 2019. No doubt while Sweden has the highest per capita immigration rate in Europe, nonetheless, even assimilation is a Nazi word in the country. This was reported by Danish journalist Michael Javling in the shocking 2014 CBN TV news piece, Soviet Sweden. Noted nation sliding into third world, they noted. The above also reports on a former Swedish radio journalist who left Sweden in 2013 and returned to her native Somalia, as CBN's Dale Hurd relates. She told Swedish television that Mogadishu was safer than the immigrant suburbs of Stockholm. A WorldNet Daily exclusive. Turkey tells the European Union to criminalize criticism of Islam. I've had several reports on this, folks. Turkey, a member of NATO, along with the United States, for years was regarded as a moderate Muslim nation with Western leanings, but it recently has taken a sharp turn to full-blown Islamic law and persecution of non-Muslims. It just got worse with a statement from a high government official that Turkey wants all governments across Europe to criminalize Islamophobia, which would include any negative comment about the religion. In other words, what they're saying is make it a crime to even speak bad about Islam, to even expose what they're really doing, to expose who the rapists really are. It's a crime to report it. This report comes from Yücel Balet, a journalist from Turkey. In a report quoted saying, there is no ideology or terminology called Islamism. The only one Islam, and it means peace. She pointed out that it is Salam that means peace, not Islam, which means submission. She wrote urging all politicians to recognize Islamophobia as a hate crime and a form of racism in their constitution. One reporter accused European judiciaries of applying a double standard by not paying as much attention to Islamophobia as they do anti-Semitism. There's nothing new about the views, the report said. In fact, the supremacy of Islam is taught in the Quran, which states, quote, "It is he who has sent his messengers with guidance and the religion of truth to manifest it over all religions." Even now, the government and Muslim Kurds continue to seize their lands and property illegally. Protestant Christians are not considered a legal entity in Turkey and are deprived of the right to establish and maintain places of worship. And they're targeted with hate crimes and speech, verbal and physical attack, and workplace discrimination. This, in Turkey, a U.S. ally. The West needs to be reminded that this tradition is clear and well in modern Turkey. Another reporter in talks against Islamophobia did not mention the atrocities committed by radical Islamists in Europe. Those abuses are at the root of the debate now about how to tackle the cells in violence in Islam without hampering the civil liberties of law-abiding Muslims. By proposing to block out all criticism of Islam on the grounds that it is extremist, anti-immigrant, Islamophobic, he's now revealing that he would welcome banning free speech to protect a religious ideology. This, folks, is going on today in Europe. At the same time that this is happening, look at the opposition our president is getting on our borders. Look at the obstacles that are being put in his way when he tries to control those that are coming in from these types of governments. Folks, it started with Obama. It's progressing now because of the influence of the Obama hangovers that are still in our government, from our liberal courts, from our press, from the Democrat Party. Our borders are a sieve. Our president's trying to stop it. We need to stop Islam before it overtakes America. Pray for our president as never before.